Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for our third virtual field day of this series. I'm Chelsea Harbach. I'm hosting this series. I work here at the Northwestern Illinois Ag Research and Demonstration Center outside of Monmouth. Before we get going with today's program, want to go over a few housekeeping items. First is I ask that you either submit questions using the chat box during the program, or you're welcome to wait until the end of the program to unmute yourself and ask your questions verbally. If you are struggling to find the chat box, you can find it in Zoom by looking for this ... button, and then you'll get a drop-down menu where you can find the chat box if you want to submit your questions that way. The field day here is would be impossible without the folks that help keep this research center running. Alan Parrish is our director of the crop research centers for the University of Illinois. And here at the research center, we've got two people who really are the heart and soul of the operation. Greg Steckel, our research agronomist, and Marty Johnson, our senior research specialist. And then I'm here as an extension educator and assisting with some research as well. Another thank you to some more people who this would be impossible without. The folks that help run the foundation for our research center, as well as the companies and individuals within those companies that donate product to our farm, seed, chemical, fertilizer, etc. So a big thank you to these folks.
My name is Phillip Alberti, and I'm a commercial agriculture educator with the University of Illinois Extension. Today, I'm going to talk about high cannabinoid hemp, focusing on early season management and discussing various hemp production strategies and research efforts across the state of Illinois. Please keep in mind that as a new crop to Midwestern agriculture, the best management practices and varietal performance of industrial hemp have yet to be determined, so this information is intended as a baseline until better recommendations become available. Cannabis plants can be classified as either industrial hemp or marijuana based on the THC concentration contained in the plant. Hemp growers are required to grow cannabis plants which test no higher than 0.3% THC to comply with state and federal regulations. It is critical to understand the rules and regulations regarding hemp production and compliance testing. Cannabis can be grown for food, fiber, and flower depending on the production system and end product. In 2019, there was a lot of interest across the state of Illinois regarding industrial hemp. And at the end of the season, we saw that only 5,200 acres were actually harvested. Based on the information here and the map, we can see that nearly all of that production was for cannabinoid production. The cannabis plant produces many naturally occurring compounds called cannabinoids, and these are found in the resinous flower of the cannabis plant. These compounds are often the primary molecule of interest for hemp production, and examples of common cannabinoids include THC, CBD, CBN, etc. While CBD has primarily dominated the market, other cannabinoids such as CBG and CBN have begun to receive more interest. As such, the production practices and harvest systems in place will have to reflect the final product, biomass for extraction or high-quality flower. Research out of Utah State University has results regarding production of various cannabinoids in the plant, and what we see is that throughout flowering there is an accumulation of these cannabinoids at different proportions. But ultimately, there is a point at which each cannabinoid begins to decrease in concentration. What this means is that there will likely be a specific peak harvest interval for specific cannabinoids. I will not touch on this too much, but a particular value in the smokable flower market is the terpenes produced by the plant. Terpenes are compounds associated with the smell of the plant material and in conjunction the effects that you feel. Many laboratories will be able to perform analysis to determine the amount and type of terpenes in your plant material and will be issued with the certificate of analysis as shown here. One thing I would recommend to growers considering growing hemp for the first time is to look at some of these pre-plant considerations. Understanding how you will harvest the material, how you will dry it, and where you are drying it are very important factors to consider. This is a high-value crop that can spoil easily, and there are things that should be planned before you even plant the hemp. The University of Kentucky has put together a great hemp enterprise budget, which is available on their website. This budget is easily manipulated to fit your needs for any production system. You are able to input market and input costs to accurately reflect your production system. In addition, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville has come up with a budget similar to that of the University of Kentucky. You can access that budget on our website as well. I have found that by combining these two budgets, it will give you a good idea of the input costs required to grow industrial hemp, although it will take some personal adjustments based on your production system, end product, and end market value. Field selection is one of the most important factors in hemp production. Hemp likes light textured and well-drained soils. Hemp should be planted in highly productive fields with a low history of weed and disease pressure. Given that there are currently no pesticides approved for industrial hemp, cultural practices and prevention will be your best control. We have learned quickly that hemp needs extra attention early in the season to get started, and then is quite resilient if root systems are able to establish. Hemp is a phytoremediator and will take up what is in the soil, including pesticides, herbicides, and heavy metals. Heavy metals contamination is difficult to remediate from crude oil and can make sales invalid. And as always, you should get your soils tested prior to the planting of a high-value crop. Seedbed preparation is important when it comes to hemp, as it is a small seeded crop with generally low seedling vigor. Well-prepared, well-drained seedbeds with good soil till promote uniform emergence and development when direct seeding. Row spacing will range, with most growers selecting row spacing between 3 and 6 feet, according to planting and weed control equipment, as well as the variety of hemp being grown. Planting population will also be determined by row spacing and selection of variety. Auto-flowering varieties, for example, are planted at significantly higher seeding rates due to reduced size, branching, and earlier flowering and maturity. Unfortunately, we do not have any updates on fertility requirements for cannabinoid hemp. The only information I can share are the recommendations for grain and fiber from the University of Kentucky. As always, experimentation and testing is encouraged to determine what's going to fit into your production system. There has been some discussions regarding foliar fertilization as it pertains to disease and floral quality at the end of the season. The most valuable portions of the plant, the flower, are susceptible to insect and disease pressure, so reducing conditions which favor those pathogens, such as keeping foreign material dry, is of particular interest. Interestingly, the study done out of Cornell University assessed the impacts of various abiotic and biotic stresses on CBD and THC ratios produced in hemp. Notice this is about ratios and not total yield. The results of this study show that there was no significant difference in CBD to THC ratio produced by hemp plants under various stresses compared to the control. These results were supported by findings from Colorado State University and New West Genetics and suggest that cannabinoid production is heavily dependent on genotype and not environmental factors. Long story short, well-bred, stable genetics produce compliant crops with a high level of desirable cannabinoids, and this is what we really want. Seeding methods will vary according to production system, equipment, and harvest strategy. Based on 430 responses, data from the Midwestern Hemp Database showed that a majority of the varieties were transplanted from seed, followed by transplants from clones, and then direct seeding. Transplants or clones are started indoors in a greenhouse about 4 to 6 weeks prior to field planting. Specialty growers are more suited for this type of production and often have the equipment and materials necessary to establish plants this way. Hemp is typically hardened off prior to planting, and transplanting methods are quite variable. Vegetable and flower transplanters have been shown to be effective, as well as the use of augers to prepare a field for the established transplant to go into. Planting or transplanting will usually occur between June and July, accounting for variability in location, as well as the variety that is selected. For the sake of time, I will not delve too much into clonal propagation, but I would like to share some references available to you and briefly discuss what clones are and their differences between clones and seedlings. In essence, a clone is a 6 to 10 inch cutting grown in the process of asexual reproduction to produce exact genetic and phenotypic replicas of their mother plants. Mother plants are simply plants with favorable characteristics which you would like to replicate. Clones retain genetic uniformity and consistent growth and are grown for about 2 to 3 weeks before planted into the field. There is a great production video with Half Moon Hemp focusing specifically on clonal propagation, which you can find on our website under the Grower Spotlight tab. While using direct seeding methods, shallow planting at about 1/4 of an inch is generally recommended to encourage faster emergence, enhance weed competition, and reduce issues with crusting. This particular field was chisel plowed in the fall for the corn stalks and field cultivated several times in the spring. A white precision planter with 30-inch row spacing and V-set, V-drive were used to allow row-by-row meter control. As hemp is a small seeded crop, it can't tolerate soil crusting very well, and so in some cases a light tillage or cultivation may be attempted to bust up soil crusting. But hemp is a quick germinating plant and will often germinate within 48 hours and emerge within 7 to 10 days depending on field conditions. Vegetative growth will continue throughout the early season until flowering begins. Hemp is known to have a slow growth phase early on before advancing to more rapid vegetative growth prior to flowering. Row spacing is likely going to be between 3 to 6 feet depending on the variety and production strategies. Plants too close together can cause issues later in the season with regards to disease, yield, and quality, while planting too far apart may make weed control a challenge. Hemp likes to take up the space that it has available, so the greater the row spacing, the greater the yield potential, as indicated by work out of NC State. Without chemical control options, weed control early in the season will be very important to ensure canopy closure and optimize production. The lack of herbicides make weed control a challenge, with cultivation, cover crops, and mowing as alternatives for weed suppression. Regardless, keeping the space surrounding the base of the plants free from weeds, especially early on, can't be understated. We then move into reproductive phase where sexual expression occurs, and we are then able to distinguish between male and female plants. Characteristic traits of female plants are the fine pistillate hairs that develop at each node, whereas the males will produce small pollen sacs. It is at this point at which if you see a male plant in your field that you are to cull them and get them out of there as soon as possible. This is because any pollination of a female plant will limit its cannabinoid production and promote seed production. Upon flowering initiation, THC and CBD will increase over time, with rapid accumulation potentially occurring late in the season. The goal of a hemp grower is to maximize production of favorable cannabinoids while staying compliant in terms of THC concentration. This is why growers are encouraged to test often during flowering to protect their investment. This is just a reminder that hemp growers are required to get their hemp tested for compliance by a state-approved laboratory listed here prior to harvest. Growers are encouraged to read the rules and regulations in their entirety prior to applying for a license, as there are specific instructions to be followed with regards to documentation and reporting. This information is available via the Illinois Department of Agriculture, but is also found on our website at go.illinois.edu/hemp. There are many factors to consider when making variety selections, including end use, state and federal regulations, environmental profile, etc. As discussed previously, important terms to understand in cannabis would be the difference between dioecious and feminized varieties, where dioecious populations contain both male and female plants in approximately equal ratios. A feminized variety contains a vast majority of female plants. This is important as the development of dioecious production systems have recently emerged in the market. Dioecious production systems produce co-products such as grain and/or fiber, in addition to cannabinoids, and are planted at a much higher population than in the feminized system. These production systems are new and will require further study. For those of you interested in learning more about this type of production system, which may fit more conventional growers, you are encouraged to check out a production video that was done in collaboration with Purdue University, New West Genetics, Colorado State, Michigan State, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have also seen the development of autoflower varieties, which will flower after a certain number of days instead of responding to photoperiod. However, most of the varieties on the market are what would be considered photoperiod dependent and may be commonly classified as full season variety. A point I would like to discuss further, though, is that cannabis is often a photoperiod dependent crop, and so origin and conditions for breeding are also important to consider for how specific varieties will adapt to your environmental profile. For example, in the top image, a race of cannabis photoperiodically adapted to a long southern season would come into flower very late when grown into a short northern season. whereas as the image in the bottom indicates, a race of cannabis sativa photoperiodically adapted to a shorter northern season would come into flower very early when grown in a longer southern season. This is similar to soybeans. The longer these types of hemp plants are in the field prior to flowering, the larger they will get, similar to soybeans as shown by the preliminary work out of North Carolina State. There are also autoflowers which will reach maturity after a certain number of days. Growers are currently experimenting with both early and late planted autoflower varieties to stagger production and harvest schedules. There is limited information regarding variety performance of both autoflower and full season varieties. Based on the entries from the Midwestern Hemp Database, we see a lot of the usual suspects in terms of varieties which were chosen this year. Cherry wine, berry blossom, and T1, or Trump, for example, are some of the most commonly occurring varieties. Listed here are the 12 most listed varieties that were utilized in the Midwestern Hemp Database. We will be very interested to see how these varieties perform this year, and that data will be available on the database itself as it becomes available. Not only will we be able to collect a lot of information on variety name, but the suppliers of these varieties as well. I have been fortunate to have both an autoflower and full season variety planted in the same field, and so we are going to take a closer look at the timing and development of both of these plants throughout the growing season. First, the autoflower. The autoflowers were planted on June 1st at 38-inch row spacing at about 4,500 seeds per acre. The autoflowers started maturing about a month after being in the ground, so between July 1st and July 8th, and with a relative maturity of about 75 days, these plants were ready for harvest around August 10th. The plants were then harvested by hand from the field and were taken to the shed where they could be dried post-harvest before going into storage. All in all, from soil to harvest, these plants were in the field for 72 days. The particular growers here were hand harvesting in order to ensure higher quality. The plants were taken from the field and hung to dry in the shed. Keep it in mind that these are being dried in the barn in August. This is much different than the full season varieties which are planted, which do not harvest till about October. So in the same field, here is a video of the full season varieties which were planted on the same day, June 1st. These particular plants were planted at different row spacing of the 76 and 38 inches to give a row spacing experiment a try. We can see that the planting populations were significantly lower because these varieties are not going to be flowering until mid-August or so. We can see that the structure and morphology of these plants is much taller than the autoflower varieties, and so the production system to grow these is substantially different. In this last portion of the video here, this is in the narrow row spacing at 38 inches, and what we can see is that these plants, before they even begin to flower, have already begun to touch each other and crowd the rows. This just goes to show how important row spacing is, depending on the plant population and variety that's being planted. Crop diseases can occur at a variety of locations on the hemp plant, ranging from the flower all the way down to the roots. While we have observed some diseases and pests in the past year, it is still too early to determine which are economically significant. When considering plant diseases, it is important to consider the disease triangle, noting that we must always have three things for a disease to occur: a susceptible host, a pathogen, and environmental conditions that favor the host and pathogen to allow disease development. Understanding these principles will help make disease identification much easier in the future. The University of Wisconsin-Madison recently released a field-grown hemp insect and pest guide, which is available online. This guide provides visual aids as well as potential solutions for these issues. While these resources may not be directly applicable to Illinois, they may provide useful information. When it comes to post-harvest testing, we saw some interesting and quite unnerving things actually from 2019. Again, results from Rock River Laboratory, whose entire presentation is available on our website, showed that samples continually tested significantly above safety thresholds for aerobic plant counts and total mold and yeast counts. As you can see, the safe limits are shown by the orange lines, which had actually to be zoomed in to see. This is of concern for producers looking to sell smokable flower and consumers looking to smoke it. Due to limits on pesticide application, this is one area, again, where cultural practices may be a factor. If we can limit the conditions which are favoring disease, that is the cultural practice we would like to see. Also, this is an area of the industry which is currently not truly being enforced and or regulated, and is something to keep an eye on moving forward. Moving on to heavy metal testing, results showed some samples testing above safety thresholds for lead, arsenic, and cadmium. However, these thresholds are from the California Bureau of Cannabis Control for inhaled medical goods, as we currently do not have thresholds for hemp in Illinois. However, this is of concern and should be something that growers be looking at as they decide on where they're going to plant their fields, because this is something that has been popping up in the news here and there regarding products having to be recalled due to heavy metal contamination for the. We have noticed anecdotally and as presented here in information from New West Genetics and Colorado State University that there is a great deal of variability in terms of performance across and within varieties. This is of great concern to our producers who are attempting to grow compliant crops without having research-based information on variety performance. See the information here, which illustrates a variety called Cherry Blossom from two separate competitors showing similar THC but substantially different CBD production. For this reason, a collaborative effort consisting of land-grant institutions and private labs came together to help develop the Midwestern Hemp Database. This project utilizes dedicated grower cooperators to properly collect and record data in exchange for discounted cannabinoid profiling. This data is available in the Midwestern Hemp Database, which is available at our website, go.illinois.edu/hempdatabase. Primary goals of this project are to obtain a better insight on variety performance regarding cannabinoid production and agronomic performance. Via partnerships with grower collaborators, we have 430 variety entries in the project and will be able to obtain a great deal of information on production system and variety performance. If you go to our webpage and scroll down slightly, you will see the hemp database itself. Here, we have obtained information regarding previous crop, soil type, planting method, etc. for each of the 440 variety entries into the program. What's really neat about this is that over the course of the flowering period, we will start to obtain information pertaining to the cannabinoid production of each of these varieties, which will be displayed on the database here. As you can see, we have over 158 different variety entries, some with as many as 33 variety entries. Also, we are looking at things like seed source to see how different varieties are performing based off of where they are coming from. This information will be updated frequently as information becomes available, and we will also be adding information like yield and other agronomic data at the end of the season. This database is completely unique in the sense that it is interactive and will allow you to search based off selected parameters. So for example, if you wanted to look only at the state of Wisconsin, and select a specific variety that is being grown in Wisconsin, or looking for a specific seed supplier within that state, you can do so, and that information will be updated to reflect the changes based on those filters. This website is living and breathing document and will be updated as improvements or suggestions come available, so you're encouraged to reach out and let us know what we can do and if we can do anything better. At this time, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have. You can either ask them now in the chat box or you can reach out to me via email at any time. Thank you so much.
Here we do have a question in the chat for Phillip. Been seeing lots of stalk boring insects up north. What are your management recommendations for prevention?
That's a great question. We're certainly seeing a lot of that up here in the northwest corner of the state as well. Saw a lot of that last year. You know, it's really tricky being in a point where we don't have any in-season management options specifically for this. The one thing that might be useful is to avoid planting this in the same field or a field with similar disease, something like soybean. or corn if at all possible. I know we see a lot of that around here where corn is kind of the border crop around the hemp, and it can kind of turn the hemp crop into a trap crop for favorable disease, especially if you're using some type of traded corn. It might force those insects into your field. So thinking about ways to plant other favorable plants around your hemp that might be more attractive, or minimizing the number of attractive plants that you have surrounding your hemp field are likely going to be the only management strategies we have until we can get some approved insecticides and learn which of them are actually going to be useful.